Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It's Harrisburg City Councilman Dave Mattson, Chair of Community and Economic Development. President Williams is excused and Vice President Allett is excused. So that leaves me to kick off the meeting. Procedurally for these, I'm trying to remember, we don't do like, do we have to do a count? Ms. Houston?
You can if you'd like. It's not necessary or mandatory because it's technically like a work session.
Okay. All right. We won't worry about that then. I know some are joining late. That's why I asked. So some of the council members are on their way. But yeah, all right. Well, I just wanted to kick off and just let everybody know a quick update before we hand it over to Mr. Knight to present the first chapter we'll be discussing this evening. Is we have had some internal conversations about the process and how to get the most engagement out of the community. I've talked with the mayor and I've talked with President Williams and some of my colleagues as well. And while Zoom has been good, given the circumstances and restrictions with COVID, we do think it's not been the most effective way to get the participation council members would like from the community. So we're going to, after this session, it will likely be the final one we do via Zoom. We will use these are recorded. They will be a city's website. So people can reference it. We're going to try to find a way to make it digestible so you don't have to filter through if there's an important topic and try to find it through a 2-hour recording. So we are having those conversations. So basically what we'd like to recommend to people is read the document or find a topic that you're passionate about, read that chapter, then maybe find that where we discussed it in these videos, look at that as a reference point. And then maybe what we're hoping to do is to have some meetings in person, either through the school district or some of our local community groups or churches. So safely with CDC guidelines. Now the weather is turning a little bit better. Maybe we can do them up in Bellevue Park. But we think in person and a more of a grassroots effort for getting that participation will be key for our population. So just wanted to give a quick update there that this is not the final meeting, but likely the final Zoom meeting. I think we've kind of gone to the lengths that Zoom can do for us in this process. So with that, any questions, please save them for when we do the public comment. But then, yeah, with that, we will get right into it and let Mr. Knight discuss the first chapter. Mr. Knight, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Mattson. Sharing the screen right now. Are you seeing the full screen version of the slides? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
So tonight's meeting, we will be discussing the final 3 chapters of the document. That's the Parks, Open and Civic Space, Historic and Cultural Resources, and the Integration and Implementation chapters. So these again are the final 3 chapters of the 9. So we'll be going through these in the similar format. I'll be discussing a little bit about each chapter with an overview, including how the chapter is laid out, some of the information that's in it, maybe how it relates to other chapters or to projects you may be seeing in the city going on right now. And then I'll turn it back to Councilman Mattson to open the floor for comments or questions from the public. With that, let's go to the first chapter is the Parks, Open and Civic Space chapter, as noted. In going through these chapters too, I do want to note that the first slide you will see after the introduction slide is the what we heard slide, which is what you see right here. And these ideas all came from a robust public engagement process that occurred throughout most of 2015 when our public engagement was really kind of kicking off. A lot of these ideas came from basically 2 formats, hard copy that we received from the public, whether that was coming out to the meetings that we specifically held for the comprehensive plan process. We also at those had little boxes with idea slips on them and response slips. And then we were also out in the community as well at things like National Night Out, block parties, neighborhood group meetings, and we solicited hard copy feedback at those events as well. In addition, we had the BHBG website. It was www.behbg.com, through which individuals from the public were able to propose their own ideas and have them upvoted through a crowdsourcing format, whereby the ideas that got the most likes kind of rose to the top of the list. And underneath those ideas, people could propose similar ideas or comment on those. So that was a really good way for us to get the input from the public, directly from the public, more so than even getting direct feedback with people at these face-to-face events, because that way they could really be a collaborative discussion of each individual idea. So from those top ideas in both the hard copy format and the website, we listed what you see here on the screen. So a lot of what you see here with the regards to park, open, and civic space does talk about parks, both our physical infrastructure and our programming. The more activities for youth and teens, you kind of only see that once in this list, but that was an idea that came up over and over again throughout our communications. There was a lot of discussion on how, for example, we have our parks and playgrounds are, built for youth, and that's good. They have, swing sets, things of those nature, but we're missing that kind of evolution of equipment and a play space as children age and get older, teens, young adults. And so, we definitely heard that in the comments, and that's been addressed here in the document itself. A lot of discussion about the types of facilities you'd like. You see here more pool facilities, and then also things like spray and splash pads, new sports courts and fields, a bike and a skateboard park. So that kind of follows with that of giving more and more varied types of recreational experiences for members of the public. A lot of discussion about maintenance of the parks, and that kind of factors into the document too, with how we balance the maintenance needs of the parks with the capacities of city staff and ensuring coverage of the city so that everybody has access to green space close by. And then there's a kind of focus on maybe more current trends in open space, such as urban agriculture, parklets, and those are become pretty common throughout the world in many cities over the last decade or so, where you're taking parking spaces and maybe just doing a little 8 by 22 foot seating area, or it can be green space, or it can be used for businesses, relaxation, and then dog parks as well. And dog parks, we do have those in the city here. The Friends of Midtown operates one off of 7th Street, and that's kind of a bit more of an informal one. And then out in Reservoir Park, as part of the Reservoir Park Master Plan that was completed a few years ago, there is a proposal for a dog park on the far eastern end of that park. So, we are beginning to incorporate a lot of the ideas that we've heard through the public engagement. So the first kind of just after the what we heard chapter or component of the chapters, we're discussing the trends and major concepts to kind of look at how the concepts in this particular chapter are being addressed kind of nationwide, how that might apply to the city of Harrisburg. So in this section here, you see the functions of public space. So, each of our green spaces, parks, playgrounds have kind of multiple components to them. It's not just play space. Sometimes it can be stormwater management. If there's, green stormwater infrastructure tucked into a corner, there can be ecological stewardship if we allow some of it to grow, for example, wildflowers and natural vegetation. So, here are the 8 that are laid out in the plan document itself: recreation space, pollution remediation, gathering space, land use and value management, fresh food, stormwater management, ecological stewardship, and neighborhood connectivity. And again, it's not necessarily that each park functions in one of these capacities, but that we try and bring as many of these capacities to each of the parks and open spaces as possible, so that they really kind of provide multiple benefits for the community. In addition to the way the park is used or the way the park is laid out, here you have the large parks. That's a reservoir park, view from Reservoir Park from behind the reservoirs, are linear parks. And this is the greenbelt at the state hospital grounds, the neighborhood parks and playgrounds. And those are, again, the smaller ones, usually and spread more evenly throughout the community. We have streetscapes. So this was kind of an idea that was brought up during the mobility and access chapter, is that our public rights of ways are not just needed to move people around, but they're also expressions of the communities in which they're located, and they're spaces for people to be able to socialize, to play, and to overall experience their community. So we felt that that was definitely a core idea to put into this chapter, to figure out, again, ways of maximizing the use of these spaces, really ensuring that they're bringing the maximum amount of benefit to the neighborhoods in which they're located. We have plazas and squares. So we don't currently have too many of these in the city of Harrisburg. You see here Market Square. There's the plaza between the two buildings of Broad Street Market. And there's the plaza up at 13th and Dairy Street in front of the little shopping area. But the document itself proposes many more of those as centers of the community, as places where you can draw, for example, businesses around, and then people can sit outside and eat, talk to one, meet their neighbors, play, and just in general, like, enjoy the neighborhood around them and the community around them. And then finally, we have the concept of campuses, and that's particularly relevant to City of Harrisburg. One, because we have the state hospital or state capitol complex here, obviously in the downtown. A lot of times it might seem like that's off limits, for example, or it's, it needs to be specifically programmed, but it's something that anybody can walk through at any time of the day or night. So it really is, kind of an open space that's available to the public at all times. But how do we basically educate the public on that, and how do we broadcast that to let people know that these spaces don't have to always be formally programmed or formally used, that they can just be places you can enjoy at any time of the day. In addition, we have a lot of types of institutions here, from HAC to the William Penn campus, to the state hospital grounds, to the Pennsylvania Higher Education campus up on North Front Street. So, as we evolve and as these places change and as we get redevelopment and reuse of these, how do we make sure that we're still getting the benefit of these open spaces, these large grassy areas, these shaded areas that are great places for our residents to go and experience? Here's a map of basically all of the formal parks that we have here in the city of Harrisburg. And this is kind of important for two reasons. As you see here, there is a walk shed around each of them. So that's kind of a core component of park access, is making sure that park space is available to the public within a quarter mile. So that's approximately that 1,000 foot walking distance, is a little bit more than that. But we want to make sure that, the whole city is blanketed in that gray buffer area. And so, as you can see in this map, that's not the case at the moment. There is what's called a park desert that runs from really from the north and largely along the Cameron Street corridor, all the way down through to about the Dairy Street area, where it goes out to the east, and then further south into South Harrisburg. So a lot of that is due to the fact that it's, railroad tracks, industry grew up along there. So it's a bit difficult to put that there, but as the plan will show, there are proposals for new types of formal parks throughout the city, and including, a large park on the south side of the city that kind of balances City Island, Reservoir Park, and Wildwood Lake to the north. And then as we look to incorporate more smaller parks and playgrounds into areas in East Harrisburg and in South Allison Hill. So, that's kind of one of the balancing that we're doing between what our resources are, what our capabilities are, and what the community needs going forward. Here are kind of a bit of a cross section of the different types of large and linear parks we have here. So I kind of discussed that a little bit earlier, as the different types of parks. And up there in the kind of top right corner, you see Paxton Creek Greenway. That's the only one that doesn't really exist right now in a form that would be recognized as a park, but it is a core component of the project, both from a mobility and access standpoint, and that it can be a bridge from the northern part of the Greenbelt to the southern part of the Greenbelt, bisecting the city, but also in terms of the environmental benefits it would bring, in terms of ecological benefits, in terms of floodplain management for that corridor, which again then can turn into economic benefits for the city. Here's a list and kind of a pictures of each of the neighborhood parks that are throughout the city. So you see, we definitely have a variety of different types of facilities, from playgrounds to sports courts to the pools. One of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, are we ensuring that as we upgrade these playgrounds, we're doing so in a geographically cognizant manner, so that we're making sure that our upgrades are able to be accessed by all members of the public. I think as you look at these different parks and you look at the names of the different parks, one of the things that's always kind of occurred to me is that we could maybe have better names than Fourth and Dolphin Playground, for example. And one of the really cool things we might be able to do is recognize prominent Harrisburg residents of the past in naming new playgrounds, or providing connections to the past by calling it the Lottsville Playground, for example, as you see down there. And so that's just kind of an interesting idea that we may be able to, that may incorporate both the parks and playgrounds and historic and cultural resources components of the planning document. The next kind of third of the document of this chapter is the open space. And so open space kind of underlays that parks and playgrounds portion, because it's a bit more expansive than that. It's not always, again, formal play areas or programmed areas or spaces. We also have a lot of wild and natural places here in the community, and they can be used for a number of different benefits, including, as you see there on the side, stormwater management, pollution remediation, ecological stewardship, and food production. Ecological stewardship, we have that great Wildwood Lake to the north, and flooding mitigation and pollution remediation. That's something where the large southern park that I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier might come into play, where you can put a park in the floodplain at the bottom of the Paxton Creek that runs through old industrial areas, and maybe have that dual benefit of mitigating flooding that occurs somewhat frequently along the Cameron Street corridor, but at the same time finding ways to reuse that industrial land. And finally, we have food production. That's I think older picture, a couple years old, of the greenhouse up in Reservoir Park that, as we heard a couple weeks ago at the city council meeting, is kind of in the midst of a renaissance and a rebirth. And there's a lot of, dedicated people and dedicated energy going towards fixing that up. And it can be a great, tool for the city, and a great learning experience for members of the city. And not only do we have these, but we also have community gardens like Joshua Tree or Joshua Farm throughout the city, some smaller and more informal than others. But, this is a way that we can bring in other benefits to this green space, especially food production, which we talked about also in the community facilities chapter discussion. So, just kind of another example of the ways in which these components of the plan are layered on one another to hopefully build on one another. And then the final third of this chapter is civic space, and this is comprised of streetscapes, plazas and squares, and campuses. And as previously noted, the streetscapes is both the right-of-way, what's on the ground, sidewalks, roadbeds, medians, things of that nature, but also the buildings and the urban environment that frames those spaces. So it's not just important to have, a nice laid out tiled plaza area if there's nothing around it to activate it. So we want to make sure that we're creating spaces that are attractive, throughout the community. That provide people with safe pedestrian access to walk through them and enjoy them, and provide space for people to socialize, and that they also define not only the city but the communities in which they're located. Like these can be very potent gateways that really help to crystallize in people's heads what a certain neighborhood means. Oh, I remember that. That's that area that I sat out and enjoyed a nice cup of coffee while people watching. So, having these streetscapes is a very important aspect of our open space and of our public rights of way. Additionally, we have the plazas and squares. As shown right there, we have kind of the two of the three that I think I can think of off the top of my head as kind of actually designed places that are civic plazas, but the document itself proposes, quite a few more, including one that I think it's referred to as City Square in the document. That would be along Market Street, right at the Paxton Creek. So that would be a way in which you can maybe incorporate a skate park down there that could be used to accommodate flooding, but also as a way to bring people to that corridor and to that area, so that it's not quite as maybe sterile as it is right now. And then finally, you have the campuses. Again, these are not only open spaces and parks, but they are civic space. They're places where people gather. For example, I'm sure many people are aware of the protests and gatherings that happened throughout much of 2020 at the Capitol complex, as people in many cases are exercising their rights and freedoms to assemble, and how we make sure that these campuses, as they're going forward, whether it's William Penn High School and whatever happens with that development and with that property, is able to retain the benefits of these civic spaces, and does allow people to access it and express their freedom of movement and their freedom of speech. So out of this chapter, here are the key issues. You see quite a few, but I highlighted a couple here that I wanted to bring up as real core components of the plan. The Harrisburg has many play areas geared toward young children, but lacks options for older youth. Again, that was something that I noted at the beginning, and something we heard throughout our public engagement session. The city should increase resources devoted to park maintenance or rebalancing the system to ensure every resident has access to at least one park, playground, or natural space. And so that's kind of working on addressing that park desert that I had noted before. Obviously, again, we have, those have time and resource commitments to maintenance of those areas. So how do we make sure we're using that in the most effective manner, while still, again, providing an even distribution of green spaces and parks throughout the city for the public to use. Programming exercises with regional stakeholders in health, recreation, ecology, and economic development should inform park and greenway features and designs. So that really speaks to, as we look at either redeveloping current parks or putting in new parks, coming to the table with an open mind, and really speaking to not only the community and the surrounding neighborhoods, but also experts in things like public health, in ecology, in recreational management, so that we're ensuring that these parks have multiple benefits to the community, and that we're incorporating kind of modern trends and practices when we're doing these projects. More aggressively pursuing opportunities to utilize green stormwater infrastructure. So that's something we discussed last time on February 24th in the utilities section, about how critical our stormwater management is here in the city. And it's vitally important that as we redevelop these green spaces, that we are including these green stormwater infrastructure elements in there, so that we're able to manage this in a kind of holistic manner. And then finally, while Harrisburg has an extraordinary park system, it has few identifiable functional civic spaces such as squares or plazas. And that's kind of a component I mentioned a little bit earlier. And, one of the goals here is to create these neighborhood centers and these community centers throughout the city and neighborhoods in a way that provides these social benefits, these economic benefits to those neighborhoods. So with that, we get to the goals of this chapter. And first goal, developing a network of parks and playgrounds accessible to all residents. Talked about that a bit. Enhancing the riverfront destination experience. So we're obviously very lucky to have the Susquehanna River, and that our City Beautiful movement at the turn of the century was able to retain and redevelop that whole waterfront in a way that's publicly accessible. So, we have this great asset that so many cities would, love to have. And we do have a lot of, races there. We have a lot of events, annual events that happen there, but how do we, get even more benefit out of that space and bring even more people into the city and provide even more events and festivals for the residents of the city. Enhancing infrastructure and programming to integrate Reservoir Park into the daily life of the city. And this was the document was developed prior to the development of the Reservoir Park Master Plan that I believe was completed in 2018. So we're already kind of beginning to do that through that planning process. I believe council has recently heard about the Chutes and Ladders playground that we have. We actually have a survey. I believe the city has a survey out right now that should be on our main page where you can go and provide answers on how you would use that, what you think it should look like, things of that nature. So we're kind of working to integrate that. And as you'll see in a later slide here for historic and cultural resources, the redevelopment of the Bishop McDevitt property is planning to incorporate a bridge between that property and Reservoir Park. And should that go forward and be fully realized, that will further integrate the park into the neighborhoods to the south of it. Protecting the environment of Wildwood Lake and enhancing its unique ecological value and flood prevention capacity. So one of the things the county's been wanting to do for a long time, and the county owns the lake, is to dredge it so it can provide more floodwater retention capacity. So that's kind of a long-term goal that the county's already looking at. And if we're incorporating that into our plan, it will kind of help that go a bit smoothly. The developing natural and ecological park spaces in the central and southern parts of the city. So I'd kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier with regards to a large park in the south that could have multiple benefits from a floodplain, from and ecological, from a recreational aspect, and then in the central part, throughout that corridor that I was referencing earlier, the Cameron Street corridor that kind of forms that crescent of park deserts, and again, which would have floodplain benefits, but would also create gathering spaces for residents. Preserving and completing the vision of the Manning Plan with the Parks Master Plan. So as I noted, a lot of the parks that we have today that form the backbone of the city's parks network date back to the City Beautiful movement, and the Manning Plan is directly responsible for a lot of that. And actually, the Paxton Creek Greenway that's proposed in this plan and has been kind of discussed by various entities like PennDOT was part of that original vision. It obviously wasn't done, but it would be great to be able to kind of realize an unfinished component of that plan. Promoting a culture that encourages recreation and physical activity. So, I think this has certainly been elevated as an issue throughout the COVID era here, where we can't exercise indoors anymore. So outdoors is even more important to our ability to recreate, to socialize. And so making sure that as we transition into post-COVID, we're kind of maintaining that desire for open spaces, and that we're encouraging that through more use of our park and green space resources. Employing economic development framework in the parks and open space system. So that kind of goes to the idea that our parks can be multifunctional, not just providing green space and recreational activities for neighborhoods and the residents within them, but providing things like green stormwater management, bringing people to those areas, and thereby creating customer bases maybe for local businesses, particularly in terms of some of the civic spaces that might be developed in the future. Restoring, renovating, and repairing the bank systems of the Susquehanna and Paxton Creek. So again, that's kind of a core component of the ecological functions of our parks, making sure that that we're creating as much value in kind of every square foot of our park space as we can. Reclaiming Paxton Creek as a natural, ecological, and recreational asset. So again, that really is a reference to that Paxton Creek Greenway project, but it also speaks to the origin of the creek as as an ecological place. It wasn't until later on that the whole creek was channelized, and earlier before that even it was used as an industrial kind of discharge area. So for a long time we've really modified the creek to our benefits, but opening it back up to reclaim those natural benefits will be important to its health. Reducing air, soil, and water pollution through green space. Again, kind of discussed that a little bit already, but it's one way in which many of these projects can provide multiple benefits to the city. Promoting diverse ecological habitats throughout the city. You kind of see what Wildwood Lake right there, and that kind of might tend to make you think of how these would occur in big parks or have to be big projects, but this could be as simple as planting wildflowers down the median of Verbeck Street, for example, and finding these interstitial spaces within our community to bring a little more green space instead of paving, instead of asphalt. And so how can we, bring more of the park into the city? And that's kind of the city as a park was a core component of the Manning Plan. So it's kind of getting back to that foundation of our park system. Here we go, implementing streetscape designs for road classifications. And you see there how it's, again, introducing grassy medians, introducing bike lanes, introducing trees. Again, this is how we treat our rights of way as more than just a transportation system. It's a lot of people's front yards in a lot of cases. And so how do we make sure it's the best version of that and the safest version of that for all users, identifying low traffic streets and converting them into living streets. So that's a concept. What you see right there is what's kind of called a shared street or a WUNRF, where anybody can access it, but it's very clear that the focus is on safety. So a car can drive down that, but if you're riding a bike or walking down the street, you also feel safe there, even if you see a car coming, because they can't drive very fast. So we have a lot of narrow rights of way here in the city, and how can we use those to create these spaces that are maybe a little off the beaten path. Developing a bicycle and pedestrian network connecting the city's neighborhoods. And we had kind of discussed that a little bit at the Mobility and Access about that connectivity issue, particularly east-west across the Cameron Street corridor. And so this is kind of putting a parks overlay on that, an active transportation overlay on that, by saying, this can be done in a way that enhances the city's environmental and ecological sustainability. Enhancing utility and availability of rights-of-way as civic space. Again, something we've kind of discussed throughout this presentation here, how we make sure that our streets are not just a place where we drive and park cars, but that they're, a front yard where you can talk to your neighbors, where your kids can play, and where a neighborhood can express itself. And then the final three goals of the chapter, creating new public squares to enhance neighborhood centers. Again, discuss that pretty in depth, and as well as community retail and service hubs. So again, if we're putting a square somewhere and we're able to ring that with retail options, with restaurants, so that people can kind of restaurants can spill out into that area to serve customers, which again, even more critical now in the post-COVID era, is a way to enliven the streets and to really bring a lot of pride to neighborhoods. And then strengthening connections between the city's campuses and encouraging adaptive reuse of vacant facilities. So I believe that's the state hospital grounds, and only a small corner of the southwest of that property is in the city, but it is something that impacts the city, being slightly in and adjacent to. In addition to that, we have things like William Penn High School campus. So if and when that does become redeveloped, what does that look like? What's retained? How do we encourage access to that? And how do we make sure that the reuse of that facility or the reuse of that property brings the greatest amount of benefits to the neighborhood in which it's located? And with that, I will hand it back to you, Councilman Madsen.
Great, thank you, Mr. Knight. All right, well, did the planning commissioners have anything they wanted to add?
I have nothing to add to that so far.
Okay. All right. Something comes up, please let us know. Otherwise, I'll kick it off with my questions. I know this has come up a few times in our previous discussions regarding the comp plan. I know you touched on a little bit there, Mr. Knight, but you want to do a little bit more of an elaboration on ADA and how our parks can be more accessible to that community?
Sure. So I believe that was actually a big component of the Reservoir Park Master Plan 2018, and specifically with the Chutes and Ladders playground. I think although the final design ended up being a Chutes and Ladders program, I believe the intention as we began that reimagining that space was to allow something that would allow somebody in a wheelchair to utilize that stuff to access the playground, which is now can be very difficult, especially when you have tan bark in a lot of places to roll over that. I think I don't have a lot of expertise as far as what types of equipment or what types of experiences might be great for disabled individuals, whether it's, sound-based equipment. I know up at the Heart of the Hill Garden on Derry Street, they have some drums, things of that nature, whereby, I'm sure there's many different trends that I'm not aware of in the recreational industry that are attempting to address those groups that you're talking about that have historically been overlooked in terms of our parks and recreation. I know that, in looking at a park in the South, for example, that would definitely be one thing we would want to make available is how do we incorporate somebody in a wheelchair, somebody who's blind, for example. And I think what's really neat about that area is we do have like a blank template, where we can bring whatever the current trends are, whatever the best practices are in terms of that to bear in that neighborhood. And it can become, an attraction in its own right, not just for amenity for the surrounding neighborhood, but an attraction for people who maybe don't have other places to go to accommodate those needs.
Okay, thank you. I know part of it talks about employing an economic development framework for parks and open space. Care to elaborate on a little bit on that from the economic development standpoint?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that was trying to look at how parks could enhance the neighborhood, and by enhancing the neighborhood, attract either more residents or more businesses. Another component of that of the chapter is the civic spaces and the plazas and squares. Kind of as I noted, I think the traditional concept is of the European city where you go in and there's just a big square and it's surrounded by cafes and restaurants, and there's street performers, there's tables sitting out. And so by creating these neighborhood centers and these places where residents can congregate, you're naturally creating a customer base for either existing businesses that may be adjacent to those or new businesses that might want to spring up. So and you know, as I had noted a couple times during my presentation, in a lot of cases, the city does have limited resources in terms of how many parks it can take care of or how much programming it can do. So if as we develop new parks and new civic spaces, we're able to think about that economic component and how can we maybe bring economic benefits as a part of this project, we'll have more money to then focus on that, to then focus on our maintenance, to focus on putting new parks in different areas of the city. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a net financial cost. It can end up being, you know, neutral, or it can end up being positive. And I think, you know, that's maybe a different way of looking at it than we traditionally look at the issue of parks.
Okay. Thank you. And could you elaborate a little bit more on the piece where it talks about how to better integrate Reservoir Park into the daily life of the city? I know you did an overview of Reservoir Park, but I thought that aspect was interesting. I'd like to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, you know, again, Reservoir Park is one of those 3 large parks we have at the cardinal directions of the city. And so it's, you know, a great big open space. I think it's something like 100 acres or so, 103, maybe 106 acres. But, you know, it's not just the city of Harrisburg that surrounds it. It's also on State Street / Walnut Street, which is a, you know, major artery in. It's bounded by townships and boroughs as well to the north and east. So, you know, and right now it's, for example, kind of closed off to the east as the Greenbelt comes up in. And, you know, as you go across State Street to the north, it can be dangerous if you're walking or biking. So how do we make sure that you know, we overcome those obstacles and overcome those barriers, whether it's through, you know, street design, whether it's through signage, whether it's through education, whether it's through better programming. Maybe it's just simply a need to provide more services at that location. You know, we did move our Parks and Recreation Department up to the mansion at Reservoir Park. So now that is kind of centered in that space. And so hopefully what that means is it increases the programming because our presence there has grown. And it's much easier for our staff to be able to, you know, maybe have classes again in the small little huts. But, you know, so I think it's both from a physical connection standpoint to the surrounding areas, but also from a programming standpoint of making sure we're giving the community what they want. And so that's kind of one of the core focuses of our work implementing the Reservoir Park Master Plan, which is why we have that survey on the city's website, because we do want to hear from the community of not just say, oh, this one vendor has this really cool package we're going to put in here, but to say to the community, you know, what do you want to see and how do you think you're going to use this space so that we know what to go after in terms of going after grants, buying equipment, things of that nature.
Great, thank you for that. That's it for me. I will open it up to my colleagues now. Let me see if anybody else additionally has joined. While that loads, I'll just kick it to Councilwoman Daniels.
Thank you. So the chapter, this particular chapter is, you know, both a combination kind of civic space and open spaces. I didn't see much discussion about programming. Was there a reason for that?
Because I think that that's something that would come up more in individual plans you would do for parks, or maybe a neighborhood plan that incorporated a park. So kind of like the Reservoir Park Master Plan, where people may want to use that space a little differently than they might use City Island or than they might use Wildwood Lake. So when we go through individual park planning projects in that way, we get a better idea of what the community that surrounds that park, how they want to use that. Additionally, from like a small area plan or neighborhood plan, like the Heart of the Hill plan that Tri-County has, I believe, just finished up, you know, they looked at their park there, the Heart of the Hill park on Dairy Street, and said, we want to have food vendors here, have a small kind of farmer's market operating here. And, you know, I don't know that we want to, I don't know that that would have been a maybe overarching goal for the whole plan, is to say, let's put farmers markets in all our parks. But that's something where if that neighborhood for that space wants to do that, you know, that gets addressed in those smaller area plans.
And then this may fall more under integration, but I did want to raise it a little bit. I think in a lot of ways, because our parks planning also intersects with our storm water management, and also intersects with our housing maintenance kind of rules. And I think one of the things I wish I saw a little bit more of was those three pieces coming together. I often see codes fighting with environmentalists over which plants are weeds and which ones are not pollinators and all of that. And I think in, like, you know, seen it in some places where, you know, if the neighborhood is in part of the conversation with a particular public space, a space that's small can actually appear larger because the neighboring yards kind of, you know, kind of somehow mirror the green space. So that tiny little square could look and feel much larger. Plus it helps us with our stormwater management. So I wanted to see a little bit more of that. And it wasn't in the integration or in this part as much.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that can maybe be a bit more explicit. You know, I do think, you know, especially in the utilities one, we refer a lot to, you know, CRW's planning, and obviously they have the City Beautiful H2O plan, and they have various projects and strategies for incorporating green stormwater infrastructure, whether it's the big green block that they're doing up around Camp Curtin on 6th Street, or the small little pocket park they did at the corner of Bailey and 13th Street. You know, I think they do have ways of incorporating their green stormwater infrastructure into even rights of way or just vacant land. So, but, you know, that's a good point, is that, you know, maybe there can definitely be a stronger tie there, so that that's made explicit and that's very clear that, to your point, you know, a wildflower that lives for 3 months out of the year and then doesn't look necessarily great the other 9 isn't a weed. It's you know, it's providing a benefit. It has a purpose. And so, yeah, I definitely think that's something we could highlight more.
And I think, so in your PowerPoint, you did mention the pools infrastructure, but then in the comprehensive plan, maybe I missed it, but I felt like I didn't see the pools referenced there.
Yeah, so I think the pools are kind of more, in the presentation, it was a bit more of a, here's what's there now. This is like kind of our existing infrastructure. And I think the plan itself kind of moves a little bit more towards a spray park, which is better from a couple of perspectives. I believe they're cheaper to do, and they're cheaper to run, and cheaper to insure, possibly. They also are easier to implement into maybe a civic space, doing just a little small one or doing a larger one in, say, Reservoir Park. And they can, to Councilman Madsen's earlier point and your point at, I believe, last meeting, they can be more ADA compatible because you're just kind of on the ground and the water is coming up instead of like having a pool. So it's, you know, that's kind of, I think, where a lot of communities are going, is into those spray park areas. And, you know, I think that's something that the plan is kind of looking at it from that holistic perspective of, we can do this cheaper in more places and kind of address a larger audience by doing these spray parks.
Yeah, no, I understand like that value, and I see a lot of places adopt them, but you know, I don't want us to lose sight of the pools, because to have the pools, especially if you have the programming to go along with them, means people have a skill that gives them access to other spaces. You know, so you learn to swim in a swimming pool in Hall Manor, but it prepares you to take on internships and, you know, biological programming at local zoo, you know, like, you know, SeaWorld or whatever, that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't know how to swim. So, you know, and then so there's a particular life skill that they bring with them. So I don't want us to lose sight of that, because we already do have a lot of residents who, we live right next to a really gorgeous river, and we have a lot of residents who've never been to the river, and much less, not that I want them swimming in the river, but if they were to fall in, I would like them to be able to survive falling into the river. So I don't want us to lose sight of that.
That's a good point.
But I think that's it for my comments.
Thank you. I saw Councilman Majors. Is he with us? I thought I saw his name on there.
Yep. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah. Yes, I'm here. I came in late, so I don't have any comments now. I look forward to hearing what the public has to say on this section.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Bowers?
I don't have any questions, just sort of reviewing the goals, but I did have a few comments. First, thank you, Mr. Knight, for reminding everyone about the Chutes and Ladders survey that is live. I'm hopeful that residents will participate and we will gain some great feedback on how to move that project forward. You also mentioned potentially renaming some of our playgrounds to memorialize or honor residents who made an impact in our community. And I just wanted to remind everyone of the Braxton Playground, named after Miss Harriet Braxton, and the Morrison Park, or Sunshine Park, named after Judge Morrison. So I think it's a beautiful way to memorialize those individuals who have really impacted our community. So I would be in favor of possibly naming either some of our parks or playgrounds in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, that reminds me of something that I wanted to mention. When I was down at the riverfront a few weeks ago, I was at the John Harris gravesite, and there's a little placard that talks about the history. And I actually hadn't really read that placard until I was there, and I just had a little bit of time. And it talks about how John Harris was saved by a slave called Hercules when he was kidnapped by some Native Americans. And I guess Hercules got some opposition natives to come and save him. So I feel like we should have something about that. I think that's pretty interesting. And, like a monument for Hercules. I mean, he as much saved the founder of Harrisburg and made Harrisburg happen, So anyway, just thought. All right, Councilwoman Green.
Thank you, Councilman Madsen. I don't have any questions. Being part of the Planning Commission, I was, here throughout the development of this plan, so I'd rather hear from the public and their comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, don't believe I missed anybody. I will open it up to public comment at this period. Ms. Houston, are there any hands raised? I don't see. Oh, there it goes.
There
Okay.
is one hand from Jenny Dallas.
Yeah, Ms. Dallas. Did you unmute her? Or she?
Yes, she's able to speak now.
Okay. All right. Good evening. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a question as far as like a lot of the, the parks and recreation and so forth. It's the siting, to like think and imagine. But I'm just wondering, can we get like a timeline, or is that in another section of when some of these things would be implemented, and by whom, like who implements these various projects? So just a little explanation on the process, maybe.
Yeah, so certainly in the integration implementation section, it talks about, I think, some of the larger parks projects that we would know now. For example, Paxton Creek Greenway. We know that's a long-term project. So that's something you kind of do piecemeal over time as you're able to maybe get grants or work with adjacent property owners. In other cases, I know that Tri-County Community Action through their Heart of the Hill planning process is working on identifying space around 14th, 15th Street, something like that, in order to incorporate a public space. And certainly the city would, I guess I don't want to speak for everybody in the city, but, certainly I think the document envisions embracing other efforts from either organizations or communities to say like, hey, we'd like, our space to go right here. And, we're, committed to working with the city to find out what it should look like and when we can get it there. We have Kevin Sanders, our Parks and Rec director, great director, is out in the city a lot. We have a couple great grant individuals who work on grants that can identify resources to work on that. And, I think the first start is planning, looking at where do you do that and how do you lay out the process for getting to that eventual park in terms of design, in terms of fundraising, maybe there's site clearance that you need to do, things of that nature. So I don't think the plan exactly knows where these new parks will go. And so it's harder to plan beyond that. But it envisions, it supports that goal of making sure we get more parks throughout the community. So then when somebody does come to us, when either Tri-County Community Action or a community group or neighborhood group says, we want to talk to the city about putting a park here where there's no park around us, that's something our plan is going to say, yeah, that's supported. So whoever's in charge here can refer to that plan and say, that's something that we have as a long-term goal.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for that, Ms. Dallas. Any other questions?
Looks like that is the only one for this evening.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that comment is I think this kind of came up in a few of the discussions and some other conversations I've had with community leaders between threading that needle between aspirational and what can actually happen. I know that there's sort of different thoughts on that. So, I mean, that's going to be a constant thing as we work through the document is aspirational goals. I think we should dream big. What's realistic within 5 to 10 years? Maybe some of the goals aren't quite there, but we should shoot or aim for them. So anyway, just wanted to add that aside to that comment. But with that, we'll kick it to we'll conclude this chapter and then we will start with the next chapter. Go ahead, Mr. Knight.
Okay. Share that. So our next chapter is historic and cultural resources. We felt that, I think the municipality's planning code just requires there to be, a inventory or a discussion of historic resources, but we kind of wanted to fold cultural aspects into this chapter as well, because, a lot of, our culture is tied up in our history, and a lot of our culture eventually becomes our history. Having the Capona event, for example, as we've done for so long, is kind of an important component of the city. So we wanted to not just look at kind of the history, but look at, the history we're making now, and with the history that we can make in the future with the types of cultural expressions of our residents. So here are the top ideas we got during our public engagement session. City beautification initiative, enhancing the river experience. So you kind of see that again here. Doing things like opening Broad Street market on Sundays, having city murals, and of course, since this time, I believe we've had several Sprocket Mural Works art mural fests throughout the city. I think they started in 2017, and then we have one in 2019, and we had a couple done last year as well. So, that's something that we're already incorporating. Started small around downtown and is now kind of expanding out into the neighborhoods that surround that. Doing facade improvements. And again, that's something we heard throughout the economic development and housing chapter. So it kind of shows how these threads really kind of weave through multiple aspects of the plan. Incorporating Bishop McDevitt into Reservoir Park, again, kind of see that again. And I think that's not just, I would guess the spirit of that idea from the public is not just about Bishop McDevitt, but about things like William Penn as well, or the Steel School, where you have these great old buildings that have been around for so long, and how do we make sure that they are still standing for another 100 years, and how do we incorporate them into redevelopment of these sites, retaining historic architecture, limiting demolitions. So that's something that our Harrisburg Architectural Review Board has kind of kicked around a little bit, as far as having a demolition delay ordinance. I believe we had something on the books like 10, 12 years ago where that idea was kicked around. I'm not sure if it ever got adopted. I don't think so. But that's something we can look at to make sure that we don't have buildings have demolition by neglect. Nothing purposefully done towards them, but just people forget about them. A property owner, doesn't invest in it, and all of a sudden you're losing some of your historic building stock. More diverse festivals and events, and I think that's something we actually heard pretty strongly during the Planning Commission webinars that we did back in September. That was something that's very clear in my head, that the attendees of that really wanted to see an expanded focus in this chapter on engagement of not just the downtown for events, but in areas throughout the city, and also a kind of focus on bringing more residents into it. So it kind of had a more diverse flavor. So it wasn't just the traditional events we've done, but it's kind of newer events and kind of different events, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whether it's art, trying to really expand that, because we do have, so many different cultures and so many different people here in the city. And it'd be great if we gave everyone an opportunity to kind of express themselves in some manner, and within their neighborhood, not necessarily having to come downtown, for example. And then finally, tourism promotion. I can think we discussed that a little bit during the economic development aspect, but certainly bringing people to the city is good overall for the community. We're state capital, so we're kind of an attraction already in that regard. We do have events, we do have landmarks, we do have places people want to visit, but how do we make sure we're doing more of that? And what does that mean, tying it back into economic development for local vendors or local businesses, and bringing more tourism throughout the city. And again, not just limited to downtown, is a way that we can, expand the impact of those benefits. So here's a little bit of a timeline of the city, going from when Captain John Smith made contact to when we were settled as a trading post, to our state capitol building having been built and then lost shortly thereafter in a fire. And there's a couple images at the top of the screen there that kind of are emblematic of different stages of the city, not necessarily in order there, but it kind of gives a background of how did we get to where we are now in 2021 as Harrisburg, the city, and as people, and kind of informs a bit about what, why do we have what we have now in terms of, the City Beautiful movement, for example, has left us with so many kind of benefits. So in terms of trends and major concepts, kind of current trends and in historic preservation is a bit of an oxymoron, of course, but because so much of it is, backward looking and looking about preserving the past. Here is, kind of the preservation framework that kind of guides a lot of historic preservation. And again, this comes from the federal government, from the state government, as far as historic tax credits, as far as the CLG program, of which the city of Harrisburg is a participant, and even down to kind of historic preservation light, as far as the architectural conservation overlay district, and that's the Summit Terrace neighborhood. So that's the only one we have, but it doesn't mean it's the only one we have to have. If other neighborhoods are looking at, for example, they say we like the character of what we have here, but maybe the historic district regulations are a bit onerous. Maybe we look at a conservation overlay as opposed to a historic district. And so one of the things we are doing right now to address this is we are updating our historic district design guidelines. So that's something our historic preservation specialist, Frank Grumbine, and our architectural review board have been working on for about a year and a half now, as far as updating the document we have, which dates to 2009, to bring in some new concepts in terms of new materials that are being produced that might be appropriate for historic districts, in terms of new types of administratively approvable projects. So Fibrex windows instead of just wood windows, which is something that wood windows were something that were always required in the past, and more recently the board has been authorizing different kinds of materials, usually going through a test case process whereby they'll give one or two applicants approval to try a new material, and if it ages well over a couple years, they'll kind of move that into an administratively approvable material, so that somebody looking to do that for their property no longer has to go back through HARB. But overall, the point of the document is to bring historic preservation in Harrisburg up to date and to be more reflective of the different neighborhoods in which it's located. And to that end, Frank will be leading 2 webinar discussions coming up here in March, on March 17th, next Thursday, and on March 24th. Next Wednesday. And then March 24th as well. So that's a chance for the community to maybe say what they like about the document, or what they like about their community that they hope makes it into the document, so that the document becomes a bit more of a useful tool for the public. To the right, we have the historic districts that we have in the city, and there are really 3 kinds of historic districts. There are national historic districts, and those are kind of managed by the state, Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, and those are only triggered if you're using federal funds, or if if a project requires a federal review. So there's limited involvement from the city, and a lot of stuff usually doesn't get reviewed through that Section 106 process. You have the municipal historic districts, and that's really kind of the foundation of historic preservation here in the city. We have 6. I think we're 1 short on there on the map, but that's where you're going through the architectural review board. You're following the regulations in the design guidelines, and a lot of those are kind of clustered around downtown, because those are where the oldest buildings are, of course, being that that's where the kind of city grew from. And then you have eligible historic districts, and those are districts that have demonstrated, either some historical value, whether it's the type of architecture, whether it's the people who are in those areas, whether they happen to be representative of different types of design or construction, but they haven't been deemed to have a formal designation. So those still go through the Section 106 process too, but they have kind of even less regulations than even the national historic districts do. So here's a list of the places that we have here in the city on the National Register of Historic Places. So the National Register maintains both our historic districts here in the city, but they also have individual properties. So, for example, you have the number 3 there is the Camp Curtin Fire Station. So that fire station building itself is not within a historic district, but because that building has such significance and importance, it gets individually designated. And so, these can become, much in the same way our parks can become, these can become kind of a, again, a tourism angle or an economic development angle, and maintaining these structures and the architectural integrity they have is really important from a sustainability perspective as well. A lot of times you hear in the green industry that the greenest building is one that's already built, because all of the energy has gone into the materials, has gone into the construction. So finding ways to reuse those shells and to reinvigorate those properties is not just a great thing to do from a historic preservation perspective and from an economic perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. So you kind of see, again, that these are laid out in a similar manner to our historic districts, where a lot of them are clustered downtown. Again, makes sense because that's where the city grew from. But you see a variety of different buildings there. You see churches, you see residences, you see institutional buildings, commercial buildings, and it really, goes to show that we do have a really great history of good construction and of great architecture here in the community, and it's really important that we do everything we can to maintain those structures and to maintain that value. Number 4 there, you see the Camp Curtin Church, which was going to be, I think, was going to have a new congregation in it, as well as some residential units, but I believe that sale fell through, so that's back on the market for anybody in the looking for a church. It's a really got a great unique history and is just like a really cool building. So at the most that we can do and that this plan can do to encourage the reuse of these, the better. In addition to, kind of our structural historic resources and architectural historic resources, we have cultural resources as well. That includes, both our buildings and landscapes, which you see here, and some of our infrastructure like the Market Street Bridge. But it also includes our events and our public art. And so this is kind of really the chapter that we also folded the public art component into, expressions of the community, and whether it's, again, Capona, whether it's our art, like the waiting statue there in Kunkel Plaza, can be really definitive of neighborhoods and of communities. And so, working on expanding these that we already have to include new ones, while also doing more to promote these, is a great way to, again, bring multiple myriad benefits to the city. You see there kind of in the upper left-hand corner, that's the bridge rendering of the Bishop McDevitt building. So I can think of kind of no better synthesis of all the ideas in this chapter than that. You're taking this cultural resource, this historic resource, and you're re-envisioning it to maintain the shell, to maintain that value that it has, and that kind of recognition that it has for the community, and to bring new ideas to it, to bring new uses, to bring new people to it, and to better integrate it into the community. So, that's just a really great project. And, as the council knows, we're doing everything we can to work with them to make sure that that project is a success. So out of this chapter, here are the key issues. And I've highlighted a couple here. Harrisburg's cultural resources face many threats, including environmental changes, diminished preservation funding, and development pressures. You certainly see that the state historic tax credits, I think in the 2000s and early 2010s, there was a lot more money, both at the state level and at the federal level, for tax credits, which led to a kind of a boom in these reuses, and that money has trickled off. So it's becomes much harder to get new development in there and to find adaptive reuses for that, because a lot of developers will just tell you, reusing a church just might not pencil out, or reusing an old school building, you might not be able to retrofit it in a economically viable manner. So, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support those, to maybe identify those. It's not just, financial support, but education and engagement with developers and with the community to know what's out there that's important, and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to preserve it. Continuing education, maintenance, and advocacy of demolition by neglect. And, that's something that, unfortunately, I think we've seen in a couple cases here in the city. That's kind of happened at 512 and 514 North 2nd Street, where those old buildings kind of eventually just rotted almost from the inside out. We saw that a bit with the Jackson House building, where just lengthy period of neglect over several owners. In some cases, it's difficult to assign blame because a property might have multiple owners. It just becomes very difficult to find a way to adaptively reuse them. And we want to make sure we're not losing those resources and those buildings as we go forward and as we develop the city. Expanding expanding the city's cultural amenities and ensuring their availability to all residents and visitors. And I think, this can be done in a number of ways. We can be having more events. We can be having more events in different neighborhoods of the city, in different areas. We can be expanding the types of events we hold, whether that's some sort of expansion on National Night Out or just a whole new festival that we do in Reservoir Park, but also expanding how people experience these festivals. And I think that kind of goes a little bit to what Shemaine has talked about in terms of maybe having a digital footprint going forward and an online footprint for our festivals going forward. I think in a lot of cases they've been very in-person centric, so that you kind of have to be here to be able to experience it. But COVID has forced us and many other communities to look at new ways of bringing those events and those festivals to people. And so how do we expand on that going forward? And, by doing that, we can expand it to, much broader range of groups. And public art is a fast, effective, and inexpensive way of bringing aesthetic improvements to neighborhood and helping communities to express their identity. So that's something I kind of talked a little bit about with the Mural Works or Sprockets Mural Fest. And, they've, I believe, begun fundraising for the 2021 Mural Fest. I know I've seen some stuff on social media about how they're working with Tri-County Community Action to have planter box paintings that integrate with that organization's focus on streetscape improvements on Market Street and Dairy Street. And they're always on the lookout for a new wall or maybe a new space to paint and to help the community express its identity. So that's something, that the public or the private sector, I should say, in the nonprofit sector is can be a partner with the city. In many cases for us, it might just be getting out of the way and taking down barriers to letting them do these things. And in other cases, it may be active participation in going after grants. So that's something, that can be relatively quick and easy to help bring about improvements to a community and can really kind of get the ball rolling on other improvements. So out of this chapter, we have the following goals: strengthening relationships to collaborate in historic preservation planning. You see there the HHA Resource Center. The Historic Harrisburg Association has been a great partner to the city in terms of our collaboration with them on not just new development, but on educational seminars, on training sessions, and on other types of events. In addition to HHA, again, as the state capital, we're fortunate to have other organizations here like the Historic Society of Dauphin County, that's located down in the Cameron Mansion, and then PHMC, which is located in the State Archives and State Museum. And we are working closely with them on the new State Archives building up on North 6th Street. So in addition to moving a lot of their collection there and expanding the access, the public access to that collection, PHMC will be managing and curating the city's historic archives. So our historic preservation specialist, Frank Grumbine, has been or was prior to COVID engaged with them pretty closely on transferring a lot of the archival material we had up in the mansion in Reservoir Park to PHMC so that could go into this new facility. We're pretty close to done on that. And as soon as state workers are able to kind of go back out and engage with us, we'll be able to finish that up. So we have a lot of partners here organizationally and institutionally to help us out with not only identifying historic preservation priorities and opportunities, but in communicating with the public to make sure that we're aware and the public is educated. Expanding historic preservation protection. Again, this doesn't always mean having a historic district, for example. It may mean test driving historic preservation districts through the Architectural Conservation Overlay District process. I know a lot of South Allison Hill is in the Mount Pleasant National Historic District, which is a huge district, but only a small little corner is actually the Allison Hill Municipal Historic District. So maybe we can grow that a bit, like a step at a time, because a lot of those buildings have really great architectural and historic value and really neat architectural elements that are, for example, no different than Shipoke or than Midtown. So they have, every right to be protected as well, so long as the community wants that. So, looking at ways we can help protect and preserve the historic resources that we have here. Encouraging adaptive reuse of historic buildings, structures, institutions. And there you see the William Penn High School. Obviously, that's been vacant for a few years, I think almost a decade now. Finding a viable reuse for that is, critical to ensuring its long-term survival as a structure. We want to make sure that the building does not become so far gone that we are not able to retain it and to reuse it. I know there's still people who have a lot of ideas for what they want to see with it. And so the Planning Bureau is always willing to discuss that with them and to hopefully see that building come back into productive reuse, because it was once a very critical and central part of the city when it was operating as a high school, and it really can be again. So making sure that we're doing that not just for that building, but for others. Promoting historic preservation as a means of neighborhood improvement. So this kind of ties into that facade improvement and the blight remediation that we've discussed in a couple of the other chapters. Blight remediation doesn't just have to mean bulldoze a building or a row of buildings and build something new on it, build like a new multifamily dwelling or just even a new kind of townhome. We can put the effort into fixing up those facades and fixing up the structural issues with them to help bring people back into those buildings and to help, bring up that civic pride of that block, for example. And historic preservation can be, the kind of the beginning of that process. Increasing advocacy for and promotion of the city's cultural resources. And again, we have a variety of cultural resources throughout the city in various areas, and focusing on an educational program, a promotional program to bring people to those, to teach visitors and teach tourists and teach each other really about the city's cultural resources and its cultural identities is really, I think a big part of how we move forward as a community. And then finally, increasing public art throughout the city. We have the Cal there at the corner of Forster and Front Street, which unfortunately blew over last year, I believe. So I don't think we've put him back up or her back up. And just finding ways to increase the presence of of public art throughout the community, bringing something that colorful to a civic square that we might be working on, for example, can be a great way to kind of kickstart interest or to bring people to a place. So, those are, just big goals as far as starting out at a relatively low cost way of improving neighborhoods and of kind of bringing more attention to places. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Councilman Madsen.
Thank you for that, Mr. Knight. All right, got a couple questions. Oh, did the planning commissioners have any additional comments or questions?
I know I didn't. Does the other commissioners have any questions or comments?
No, Joe, no.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So I know that something we're going to want to do in the city is preserve the historical architecture. But often, sometimes in some of our historical districts, we get some pushback from residents saying this is too cumbersome or expensive. And I know you touched on it a little bit, but how do we thread that needle between preserving our historical architecture, but making it affordable and easy for homeowners?
Well, I think, one of the ways, as I noted, is the historic design guidelines. And, one of the reasons we've decided to update the document now or a little bit ago was because we are cognizant of those issues of, it's more expensive to do this, or, my neighbor didn't have to do this or something. So we wanted to kind of reestablish a footing, a foundation for where we are now, and to kind of look at new products that are on the market, because for a long time historic preservation was just like you use wood or you use brick or you use metal and that's it. And we realized that that can prevent people from investing in a property. And while you might not I guess retain the historic value of that property, if it means somebody's not investing in it and it continues to deteriorate, that might no longer be there. And that's not a goal, that's not an end result that we want. So, the Planning Bureau is always kind of looking at how to, like you said, thread that needle, how to say, okay, let's look at how we can make more alternative materials administratively approvable, again, so that you're not having to go before the board, that there is an easier process by which you can use a new product. And we want to make sure we're not rushing that through so that all of a sudden vinyl windows or whatever fiberglass windows are going up all over the city. But we also want to make sure that we allow a process to incorporate these, because like you said, we don't want it to become so onerous that people don't want to invest in these properties. While at the same time, we, and a lot of times in historic preservation, you can lose a historic building or historic character, a roof at a time, a window at a time, a door at a time. And pretty soon, a building doesn't even look like it has that historic value that, is what attracts a lot of people to neighborhoods like that. So, that's, something we're looking at. I would note we have our historic preservation specialist, Frank Grumbine, here, and maybe he wants to talk a little bit more about that. So Frank, if you want to maybe speak to how we're threading that needle of balancing historic preservation with, financial viability.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Hi, council and planning commissioners. My name is Frank Grumbine. I'm the city's historic preservation specialist and archivist. So this is a big stigma in historic preservation, not just in Harrisburg, but statewide, nationally even. I think a big issue is that we live in a culture where people feel the need to replace everything to make it look new. And I think citizens, not just in Harrisburg, but everywhere, have to realize if you're buying a 150-year-old house, it's a 150-year-old house. You're working with historic materials that have been in place for a very long time, and you have to embrace that patina, that age of the materials, and try to move away from that culture of, well, we need to make it look new, because it's inherent that we want our properties to look beautiful and contributory to the neighborhood. But I think it's important that we emphasize the method of repair of historic materials rather than replacing them. Oftentimes, it's much more financially feasible and realistic to repair existing materials rather than replace everything. So if you have a window that has a rotted rail on it, you could just replace the rail rather than replace the whole window system and the sashes and the frame and the sills. And so I think it's more of a educational paradigm that we have to reestablish in historic preservation. It's more of a question of how can we educate people on understanding that it's important to fix and repair rather than replace everything. And like Jeff was saying, a door here and a roof there it doesn't change the world, but it does impact the integrity of a building in a historic district. And over time, that integrity, diminishes and becomes, and it has an impact on the neighborhood and property values and, economic stability in the neighborhood as well. So, But overall, like Jeff was saying, to reiterate what he was saying, the HARB and the Planning Bureau is always open to new products, new materials, and it's ultimately up to the Harrisburg Architecture Review Board to determine if these products are appropriate for use in historic districts and or on historic buildings. So we want our communities to be equitable while also retaining their historic and cultural value. So it's always a balance, and it's really tough to thread that needle. I ask myself these questions every day. How can we do this? How can we make this better? How can we enhance the experience that people and visitors have in our historic neighborhoods? And it's not an easy problem to solve, just like everything else. But I think as we have a good group of people in the Planning Bureau and at the city, and I think it's another issue that I think we're working to solve in the currently and in the future.
Very good, thank you. The next question I have is, when we see historic buildings like William Penn, some of the churches, often what kind of happens is the city has to sort of wait for a very lengthy legal process until either the redevelopment authority would have to go to auction, for example, or at the county, and then the redevelopment authority would have first dibs on acquiring it. Is there anything proactively, and this may be a question from when the city's debt's a little bit more under control and we can borrow again, where we could say purchase the William Penn building or some of the churches and then intervene and make sure that the rehabs happen and we preserve it from a historical standpoint, so that way it doesn't deteriorate and then get destroyed? I guess, can anybody talk about that, or is there anything the city can do from that standpoint?
I think that might be, that's probably to what you alluded to, a bit financially challenging for us now. And the mechanisms to both take on the cost and liability of a historic building that may have deferred maintenance, and then to dispose of that later on maybe tough to overcome, but possibly a better solution is to maybe offer grants. So, we're going to take on cost if we buy, and then we have to insure buildings like that. And we may be able to get to the same end result of a productive reuse within a building by offering a grant or a tax abatement or something like that, instead of purchasing it and going through that process. So to me, that seems like a better process for us, and that way we don't end up getting stuck with a building too. Like, we may have the best intentions and may even have a buyer that we know about, and then something happens and all of a sudden we've got a structure on the books that we're paying to maintain, or that is whose deferred maintenance is causing issues for the surrounding neighborhood. So I think the best result, at least from my perspective, would be identifying resources, identifying technical assistance that we can use to help either current owners or prospective owner to bring the building up to a state of good repair.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, that's it for me. Open it up to questions now from my colleagues. I will start as if we were on the dais. And I'll start with Councilwoman Bowers.
Thank you. I don't have many questions, maybe just one and then a comment. So my question is for Mr. Grumbine. I just wanted to note that the public meetings for the discussion of the Historic District Design and Preservation Guide, could you please share those dates and times again?
Yeah. So as Jeff mentioned, our office, we have developed a draft document of the 2021 Harrisburg Historic District Design Guidelines, and the public meetings that will be, it's kind of more a public discussion and kind of an introductory series into the guidelines, what's new, why did they need to be updated, things like that. So the first meeting is March 18th at 5:30 p.m. And then the second meeting is March 25th at 5:30 p.m. And those, I anticipate, those will go for about an hour. I'll probably present for about half an hour and let public comment, public discussion occur for the second half. Hopefully, we have good turnout, so we have enough some good dialogue regarding the guidelines. But those are the two dates. Spread the word. I'd like to have as many people as possible, and I want good constructive criticism on the guidelines. It's been a long journey, and I'm happy that we've gotten to this point.
Sure. Thank you. And those meetings will be held via Zoom.
Zoom. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't specify. They will be held on Zoom. Yeah, just like this is being held. I have the meeting credentials. I can send them around. And I believe, I believe they're on the city website as well. Momin has posted them on the city website for the public, and as well as the new draft guidelines are also posted on the city website. So feel free to browse the document, submit comments to me. I'm sure there's some typos and some stuff that we missed in there, but that's why we have this process.
Sure. Thank you. And my comment was just, of course, I gravitated to tourism and promotion again. I think it was on the slide, the first slide, what you heard. I just wanted to note that within the Commonwealth as a whole, tourism is definitely an investment. For every dollar that's spent, there's a return of $3.43 in the same fiscal year. So imagine how we as the capital city could really maximize on that funding. So just wanted to note that, but I don't have any other questions, and I look forward to public comment on this section.
Okay, for that, Ms. Bowers. Councilwoman Green.
Thank you. I don't have any questions or comments on this chapter at the moment.
Councilman Majors.
Yes. So I think one of the larger concerns that we hear normally on these sections is, being able to provide some either incentives or working with, residents, interested residents who are interested in either preserving their own property or taking some of the properties in their neighborhoods and finding a way to spruce them up and make some changes. So I know one of the recommendations in here is talked about developing an adaptive reuse ordinance. Jeff, I don't know if you have any familiarity with that, or what would that look like if we were going to take that on here in Harrisburg, because we do have a lot of either historic or older buildings that we definitely want to see be used in a new way.
I don't think I have any ideas off the top of my head for what that would look like, but I think it might be able to look like the affordable housing ordinance we're doing, for example, where people get bonuses, where developers would get bonuses for maybe reusing William Penn High School, for example, if they're limited to 20 units by the zoning code, but they say, we need 50 units to make this viable, then, maybe we do some sort of zoning bonus to make that better. Maybe there is we do some sort of outline where it goes into a form-based code concept, which we discussed in the, I believe in the first meeting, where it would not even be limited to the zoning code, but it would have its own separate approach to zoning where we just said, look, if you fix that up, you can do almost whatever you want in there. We'd probably put some sort of limits on it, but, we'd really free that up to enable whomever is willing to take on that challenge to find the ways in which that can, be a viable project.
Yeah. Okay. And then I think part of another piece, that we've experienced in the city is, and you've mentioned it, is a lot of folks that, own historic property, but it gets put into a place of disrepair that, we have an active a demo list, which has over 400 properties on it, currently. So, I know it's going to take a few different pieces to try to address that. But is there anything we can do now, with codes to try to, pursue folks a little bit harder who buy these properties, sometimes sight unseen, for tax purposes, and don't really and don't take care of them, and then they get into states of disrepair. I know there's some state legislation that we may have to run up against, but is there anything we can do currently to improve that?
Well, I think probably Dave Patton would be the best person to ask about that. I know Dave Patton, that's always been a kind of long simmering frustration of his, is the ways in which properties can be bought and sold online, like you said, sight unseen, sometimes within a couple of weeks or a month of each other. And it makes it really challenging to nail down who's responsible for bringing that property back into, a state of good repair. And he's always, I know he's working with various officials at the state level to get new legislation passed to make it at least a little bit easier to go after those people, or to make it more expensive if they don't do the things they should be doing. So, Dave would probably be more knowledgeable about that than I would. I think another way in which we can address this, and this maybe is more of a holistic long-term solution, it goes back to the housing issue and the economic development issue, is getting trying to change that home ownership percentage, because I think so many of these buildings are owned by out of city landlords, sometimes out of state landlords, sometimes estates of people who passed away that their children, whatever, may not even know that they have it. And so how do we find ways of getting our current residents into these homes? And I think that goes to, again, credit counseling, getting help over the down payment assistance, things of that nature. So I think that's really one of those holistic overarching concepts that a document like this is well designed to address.
Right. And I know, and another thing, I guess, in terms of historic preservation or just preservation in general, I know some communities, who have had, some of their housing authorities that have, older housing stock that are in different status of disrepair, have, done some of the programs where folks can buy the properties, at a very significant discount, and then there's either incentives and or grants that are available to help them with upkeep. Understanding some of the financial situation that the city is in, or do you think, maybe working with some of the different lending institutions in our area, we could, come up with a program like that to help with some of the historic preservation and reuse of some of the current housing stock, rather than a lot of the projects that we're starting to see more projects come in, which are, using, currently vacant land to build new, when we know, as you already said, the best way to, preserve anything is to use what is currently already in existence.
One idea that I've kind of always liked, that I'm not really sure of its feasibility, is taking the architectural elements that we lose when we demo buildings, because I think right now we just kind of take the whole thing down. It can be a bit dangerous, especially if buildings are structurally unsound. But taking those slate shingles, taking railings off before we demo the whole thing, and then having like a repository whereby somebody who owns a property in a historic district can buy one of those, instead of having to have a contractor come in and build new or something like that, there's like already these shingles that can be sold at cost instead of at a markup or something. You know, I think that'd be a really cool idea. I don't I don't know how possible that is. I don't know whether the city would run that, somebody like HHA would run that or whatever. But again, we do lose. I mean, we do lose these architectural components when we demo, or when somebody takes them out and replaces them with slate shingles, for example, or with asphalt shingles, for example. And if there were a way that we were able to keep those in the city and then put those back into other historic properties at a lower cost than it would be to buy new, we can not only keep those elements here in the city, but we can ensure that other buildings that use those are able to be maintained in their current state.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. No, I think I'll then at least on that piece for folks things that are on the city's demo list, I'll reach out to Dave, Patton, and Public Works as well, since we were doing some of those demos in house to see if we could at least work on some storage for some of those properties and work on some additional ways to deal with it further. So that'll be all my comments for now, and look forward to anybody else who wants to provide comments. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Councilwoman Daniels?
Sure. So yeah, I really appreciate the consideration of having events reflect more of the cultural diversity of the city. This conversation kind of overlaps with the use of our parks and public spaces, but I do feel like our parks are revenue generating space as well for the city, and we really could maximize things like marketing them for the African American family reunions, the Latin American and Caribbean carnivals, the Chinese New Year's. India Day is a big event at HAC, so I think there are a lot of groups who have groups that are represented in the city, and we'd rather them have their festivities like in Harrisburg, spending their money here rather than like having to go to New York or Philly or Baltimore to have their events. So I think that's a valuable resource. The historic thing, I really think we do also have to look at either incentives or something to get really the tradespeople who engage in this work to make it easier. I don't know if it's easier or make more of them available. I don't know what's the cause of the shortage, but the masons, the carpenters that do this work, it's really painful to trying to get them, the ones who do know the historic preservation component to like work, to come to the city or compete for work in the city. So I don't know what the hang up is there, why that's so difficult, but it's very difficult to hire the craftsmen and craftswomen to do the work for preserving our properties. And I think those were the two comments in general, because everything else it just makes sense. That's it.
Well, and I think that's a good point. I think that kind of speaks to Frank's earlier comments about the importance of education. Not only educating residents about the value and the responsibilities of having a historic building, but educating contractors. Like maybe that can be a once a year thing where we evaluate new materials that somebody wants to bring in and talk to us about outside of a hard meeting. But at the same time, we explain to them what the expectations are when they come in and do projects here in our historic district, so that we're not doing that every time with every single contractor, and maybe contractors being like, oh, well, I've never worked there and I've heard it's hard, so I don't want to do it. But if we have like a kind of more of an open policy where we say, we're going to teach you what this looks like so that it's not so daunting, that's something we can do relatively low cost. I think up until recently, up until Frank's been here, I don't think we've had a historic preservation specialist, somebody with as much knowledge as he has. And so now that we have that staff in-house here, we can, look at doing those kinds of expanded education opportunities.
And actually, I forgot the other thing. One of the things that's been getting on my nerves lately is when a home is rehabbed, the Harrisburg Historic Association will put those plaques that say, the plaque that says this home was rehabilitated in a way. Well, there are quite a few of them where over the years, an owner changed things, it's not the same anymore. And then a new buyer buys it, and then they think they're replacing an authentic piece or something that's historically accurate because they're just going off of what, like just the assumption of the plaque is there, plus that's what was there, what the other owner did. So I think that needs to be like a stronger relationship somehow, so that those plaques actually mean something and don't end up like enabling, because in some instances the person is they really think they're doing, they're replacing with the right thing, because the home has the plaque, not realizing that their home isn't for that year or whatever. So that's something that we should look at.
Any other comments, Councilwoman Daniels?
No, that's it. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, the conversation reminded me of the old Lieutenant Governor's Mansion on Market Street. I drive by that one often, and I think that's a missed opportunity to fix or rehab that building. I don't know if there's any opportunity to do it now. Looks like it's in pretty rough shape, but yeah, definitely a learned lesson there and food for thought.
I know Dave Patton's actually reached out to state officials, I think maybe even to the state Republican Party, because I believe the person that was in that was Republican, saying, hey, this is a part of your history too, that's there, and I guess did not get a warm reception in that regard.
Yeah.
Before we hop to the next council person, I made a comment in chat and just wanted to verbalize it here as well so the public can hear it. There is a deconstruction service that Habitat for Humanity sometimes hosts, where they go into a building that's about to be demoed, take out all the things they can use for building materials, and then either use those materials on Habitat build sites, or they sell it at their restores for a discounted rate, and then contractors and other folks can use those building materials at a cost they wouldn't have been able to get anywhere else. I work for the restore here in Harrisburg, so full disclosure, but our affiliate doesn't have a deconstruction service in place. We're currently talking about it because we are seeing that trend where these buildings are being taken down and the construction material just gets thrown away, and we'd love the chance to be able to kind of redirect those waste streams and turn them into a resource for Harrisburg contractors to use. So
thank you for that. Okay, was there any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we will open it up now for public comment. I do see one hand raised, Ms. Loretta Barbie Dare. Ms. Houston, could we unmute Ms. Dare?
She is now able to speak.
Okay, Ms. Dare, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I don't know where to begin. You've hit just about everything that was on my mind that I didn't realize you were going to go over today. But okay, so let me start with the first one. And I believe I already said this at the very first meeting about the map, Jeffrey, about the on the legend. It says 10, which then if you look at 10, it says Allison Hill, where that actually should be Summit Terrace.
Yep.
And so I'm assuming at the final draft of this, when this is all over, what's the camera? When it's all over, that'll be corrected, correct?
It better. I know I'm going to hear from you if it's not.
Yes, you will. Me and the 200 plus families that are here, because I've also pointed it out to everybody I could think of in the neighborhood. I don't know if any of them are here tonight. I hope they've made it, but Wednesday's kind of a bad night to get folks, to church and choir and Bible studies. And anyway, so that was one. Someone had made a comment about using the properties over again. Oh my goodness, my little scribbles are going all over the place. Like maybe it was Frank. Frank, you and Jeffrey made a very good point about the reuse of these properties here too, and the expanding of an ACOD, and I think it's a wonderful idea. I'm curious because you did mention about the city, and I think that was Councilman Madsen's question about us being able, the city, not me personally, but the city being able to purchase these lots and hold them for development or somehow rehab them to sell them back. Isn't there something similar to that in Harrisburg? I mean, how does that Harrisburg Redevelopment Authority fit into all of this? Because they hold a lot of lots up here in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that is kind of like land banking, which is very similar to what the HRA is. I think in a lot of cases, HRA takes over vacant properties that have been demoed by the city and might have a lien against the property owner or whatever, and we end up with it through the Vacant Property Reinvestment Board. So they tend to have more like vacant properties and more so than like the actual structures on them. That'd be something I'd have to ask Brian Davis about, his thoughts on expanding HRA's footprint in that regard.
Yeah, especially as how it relates to your comprehensive plan, where you're talking about putting in parks and some of the neighborhoods that are asking for just something small, a tent, a table, some places to sit and have a chat. Many of these lots with the big white fence that's going around them could possibly be done so that there would be a nice seating area, recreation area for other places in the city. I know that the one that we had up here, we partnered with Capital Region Water. They turned that into like a rain garden kind of, it was on an environmental movement that they were definitely doing. It has taken care of a lot of the water up here. There's not the runoff going down into the Chesapeake. And there's an area there that's actually turned into a dog park. And every now and then I will see someone in that yard with their dog with a bag. And that makes me happy. So I'm thinking that maybe when you speak with Brian, I don't know how much input he's had into this plan, but that may be one way that the city can kind of move these properties that are there and give them to people who will start paying taxes on them and give you a little more revenue. And the one in particular I'm thinking about is I just found out about 1175 Bailey Street.
Mm-hmm.
That I just found out about this on Friday. No one said a word. That cul-de-sac down there at the end, at Summit Terrace ourselves, we had a plan to put 7 new townhomes up there, but because of the way they wanted to structure it, it kind of fell through. But it's a wonderful, great space, nice views and everything. But I kind of saw the diagram. It looks like some shoe boxes sitting on top of each other where they cut out something that's supposed to be a window. That's not according to our ACOD. So before anything else happens with that, I would love to get involved in that conversation so that we can share the ACOD information with him so that he's aware of that before he goes and spends a whole bunch of money. I think it's great that he's coming up here to develop, though. I think it's wonderful. And that was a comment. Deconstruction service, Zach, thank you. I thought you looked familiar. I live in Restore. So that is my home. And that's what I was going to say. At one point in time, the building at 13th and Market, that we kind of like collaborated with Habitat. Habitat actually ended up buying it for $1, and they were going to put a restore. Well, the restore idea was still floating around then. I'm talking about in the 90s. So that restore idea was still floating around, but part of that was supposed to be a deconstruction service. And I think any information you can get to the city or you can get to me. I mean, my door frame is not done right now because I'm waiting for that period piece to show up someplace so I can replace the molding and the corbels that came down. So I think that's just awesome that I'm actually going to look into that myself.
I wasn't going to out you in public, Loretta, but yeah, your voice was familiar.
Don't out me. Don't let anybody know I'm here. I believe that was it. The Capital Publishing Company. Oh, I just mentioned that. I guess it was Council Member Majors that had mentioned that about a building, a private contractor using deconstructive services. So those were all my comments. That was my question, and I thank you for allowing me to speak.
You got it. Sorry, I actually clicked out of the window.
Oh, okay. I'll mute myself.
All right. Was there any other comments?
Hey, Dave, just one comment, since I know we mentioned some of the old school district properties and this as we were having these conversations. Have we had any, again, I'll ask, and I guess the answer probably still is no. Has the school district weighed in at all on this? I know there are a few folks that have been expressed interest in the William Penn property, and I know there's also the Steel school property and a few others that have they expressed any interest in working with anyone on those? I know that there's still items pending at the school district on how they're going to proceed on those properties.
Yeah, so I haven't received, I don't think, a formal response that I can remember off the top of my head. But to Councilman Madsen's point about where we go after this, if those do involve school district properties, or even if they don't, that's certainly something we can bring up with them when we coordinate with them and say, like, hey, we're going to this next phase here. Haven't heard from you guys yet. Just wondering what your thoughts are on some of these things. Might be a good way to prod them into response, even if it's a one-line thing that says, hey, we think this is great.
Right.
That's it.
So
right.
to follow up on Director Knight's comment about, we have not received anything back from the school district, I will say that once you pass or approve the comprehensive plan, any selling of school district property within the city of Harrisburg, we need to get notice of prior to the actual sale. So that is one benefit of actually approving and adopting a comprehensive plan, that it does require the school district to notify the city of any disposal of any of their property. As of right now, I mean, obviously they own the property, they can do what they want with it. And not that we, could do anything or stop a sale, but they do have to give us notice, and then, you would have the opportunity to perhaps weigh in. So that is one of the benefits of adopting the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the next and final chapter. Mr. Knight, go right ahead.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so the final chapter here is the integration implementation chapter. And this is really where everything kind of comes together. As reflected in the title, this is where we basically put all the goals, objections, and action steps into one chapter to kind of outline the long-term, midterm, short-term kind of goals, to talk about how these goals from the different chapters relate to one another, and to kind of lay out some of the priorities for funding. And so relatively short from a conceptual standpoint here, but again, it's kind of important in how the city moves forward with implementing the ideas that are in the document. So one of the aspects of the integration component of this chapter is how these different elements relate to one another, so that we're not looking at these different things in silos. I've kind of pointed out some of the different ideas that appear in various chapters, as well as some of the common threads that connect various chapters, to really just show how the ideas in here are meant to build on one another, whether it's different aspects of single ideas or different ideas that share some common theme. And so that's really, the comprehensive part of the comprehensive plan, is looking at things from a big picture perspective and saying, okay, how do we make sure we do these so that it achieves this goal over here and this goal over here, and so that we can start working towards ticking off these boxes. And to Councilman Madsen's point, maybe we don't get to everything within the time frame of this plan, but we are getting some of the things, and we're moving towards that common vision expressed by the document. And so here you kind of see how the elements, relate to one another, and to building towards that common vision, making sure that we're not that our projects that we're doing are not conflicting with one another. So if we're doing a complete street, that we don't decide, oh, we're going to put in curb bump outs and green stormwater infrastructure, and then we're going to widen it by 2 lanes or something like that. So that we're making sure we're not doing that, and that when projects come through here, whether they're led by the city engineer, the housing department, they do have these consideration of these other aspects. And then making sure that that this relates to other plans. So here you kind of see Dauphin County's plan, as well as some plans for adjacent municipalities. So one of the aspects of the MPC is ensuring that it's generally consistent with the county plan. Now the county plan is a relatively vague document, so it's frankly, I think, kind of difficult to not be in general consistency with the county's plan. But the county may say for a northern township, keep this open space, and we don't want them to put, their county plan couldn't, or their township plan couldn't have like an airport being built there, for example. So we want to it's making sure that this plan is consistent with, the goals of other plans, because that way they're reinforcing of one another. And then also plans from within the city, such as City Beautiful 2.0 plan or the Vision Zero plan, making sure that this document is consistent with those, and that the concepts and themes of those documents are integrated into this one, so that you don't get conflicts when you go to do a project that requires CRW's review, or when you go in on a grant application, for example, that includes a stormwater management component. So that's what the integration section is meant to do. And one of the things, going back to the one of the things I kind of would actually like to see a bit more of in the document itself is this focus on showing what some of these projects look like in their final form, for example, and kind of outlining what aspects of the document they tick off. So, one of the projects or a couple of the projects I've brought up consistently throughout the various chapters here are the Meander Park between South 17th and South 18th Street, South Allison Hill. It's an old railroad spur running between some occupied but some vacant and underdeveloped industrial buildings, and then the Paxton Creek Greenway. And so I think it'd be really kind of a good addition to this document to have pages where you just have maybe what that looks like from a conceptual standpoint, and underneath that or beside it, you have the various goals, objectives, and action steps from each item or from each chapter that this project meets, to really give the public a visual representation of what the integration of these elements look like. So, it's one thing to read on a page, support Vision Zero, more curb bump outs, incorporate green stormwater infrastructure, focus on building more civic squares. But it's different when you look at what that looks like sketched out. When you see a site plan or an elevation plan and you say, oh, I can see how this project makes it easier for pedestrians and brings in a splash pad and has a little green stormwater infrastructure over here. And that's where the over there is where the new restaurant or retail shop would be, with a small space for an entrepreneur to locate in. So I think that would be kind of a good addition to this chapter of the document. But I think overall the chapter itself kind of demonstrates how these elements are supposed to fuse together and kind of complement one another. And then finally, we have the implementation tables here, and these implementation tables kind of indicate both the action item there that you see, as well as the location. Like, is this something that is in the Cameron Street corridor? Is this something in the South Side, or is it a citywide aspect, which you see up here? Doing incubator zones. So that's something that the plan doesn't envision just being in one place. So we have a citywide aspect, which can help us as government officials, better direct resources or better direct energies and attention when we know if this is supposed to go in one particular place or be kind of a more overarching objective or action. And then the tool to help implement this thing. So here you see, commission a market study to look at the absorption of commercial space in the city, and that would be a plan would be formulated to really dig down and hone in on this particular aspect. That is how you would achieve this goal. And so you see that how these different aspects below it are broken out into their different components so that you can see, how this will be outlined in the document itself. So this implementation table, again, will kind of help lay out when and where and how things the action items in the plan itself are accomplished. And with that, that's kind of the last slide we have here for the integration and implementation chapter. Like I said, it's relatively short because the information in here is really a synthesis of everything else we've discussed. As noted, I think there could be a little bit more visuals in here to kind of make it a bit more digestible for the public to look at an image and see what these things look like actually in practice. And what's great is that in a lot of cases we have documents where we have this. For example, the Heart of the Hill plan and their document they just completed, and we work with them to get permission to maybe use one of the before and after pictures of what a corner looks like or what an intersection looks like now and what it would look like in the future under either their plan or our plan. And I think generally those things are pretty consistent. So with that, Councilman Madsen, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you for that, Mr. Knight. So my first question, did the planning commissioners have anything they would like to add?
I would not like to add anything to the integration portion, but I would like to take this time to thank Chair Madsen for inviting the commissioners and all the council people for inviting us to the workshops. We really appreciate that. We spent many hours during the past year on working this. And as you all know, we are underpaid because we do not get nothing. Not even a bottle of water from Jeffrey.
Water.
That's why you saw me drink my water here, because Jeffrey doesn't give us that. But I do appreciate all the time we put in. And like I said, we put a lot of time into this to make it work and also make the language a little more, less technical than it was initially. So we do appreciate being here with all of you council people. We thank you a lot. Thank you, Councilman Madsen.
No, thank you. Wow. No, it's been a pleasure working with all of you the last few sessions. A lot of fun for me. I don't know if it's fun for everybody else, but I enjoyed it. And I think you all should be commended for all your tremendous public servants and getting through this. I know there's a lot of animosity involved with it at times, and it was difficult, but you persevered and put together a very fine document. I think we're almost there in the final touches. Just want to make sure we get a little bit more feedback from the community, and then I think we'll make some minor adjustments. I think largely, I don't think there'll be major changes to the document, but some important ones that are good for us to talk about. But thank you. No, this has been a very pleasurable experience, and I really appreciate it.
So now that Joe's buttered you up, I will warn you, when I attended all of the community meetings on Sundays and they were talking about the plan, one of the areas they were most concerned about is this chapter. So expect quite a lot of public feedback on this chapter in particular. And if you don't hear anyone tonight, the basic synopsis was, okay, these are all great goals and we agree with everything you're aiming for, but how do you truly implement them? So I'm just giving you heads up. This is going to be a chapter that will probably need the most amount of work.
Yep. And I don't know, and we talked about this before, threading that needle between aspirational and achievable. I don't know that there's a real answer for that. And I think what it's going to have to come down to is essentially a compromise. I do believe that part of this should be aspirational. But at the same time, I do think local elected officials should be held accountable to the plan as well. This is something the community has invested a lot in, and we should add up to that. We're going to try and achieve a lot of the goals that are mentioned in it. So it's I don't know. It's a conversation we're going to ongoing, but I do think we can make a compromise and find a resolution to it. So. Thank you for that. Okay. My question is, and this is sort of a good piggyback to that comment, is Mr. Knight, do you think using this during budget hearings, for example, would be a good practice for council to do? Is there a way to, for some of the goals that we do find achievable, figure out a way to attach some dollars or maybe suggest that bureau directors look at the plan and then try to put a budget to implementing goals in the mentioned in the plan?
Yeah, I do think that is, not only a good idea, but really kind of the purpose of the plan is so that whether that's, having people put a justification in, like tell us what action item, this investment will meet or not is necessary. But when we come down and speak before, we being the department directors, come down and speak before council to discuss the budget and why things are in there. I think it would definitely help to ask that question, to say, city engineer, we have a goal of multimodalism and vision zero safety. How in a general sense does the investment we're making, at least capital project wise, meet those goals? And I think that's just, good to have all of the department staff and really all of city staff, like think about, how the resources we use and the energy we expend, in our jobs here is getting us toward that shared future of the city.
Thank you for that. I guess I have a scenario question that could come about, is if we're doing this plan for a while, 5 to 10 years, it could be that many of the local elected officials that voted for it and worked on it may no longer be in those positions. What can be done, say, if a new generation comes in, and likely will, that didn't vote for the plan, maybe doesn't even like the plan? What do we do in a scenario like that? And I don't know if Mr. Knight or the solicitor could answer that, but I guess, what do we do in that scenario?
Sure, Councilman Mattson, it's Tiffany. It is a visionary plan for the next 10 years. It is subject to changes and amendment as things change. Obviously, priorities change. 10 years is a long period of time. And, you know, the comprehensive plan has not been updated in such a long time. And I think everyone was recognizing that this was just a starting point to get something on the books with the expectation that it would be changed in incremental portions, whether that's 3 years from now, 4 years from now, and smaller portions. You don't do a complete overhaul, but yes, obviously, as priorities change, as new funding comes in, that the Planning Commission could, you know, take another look at specific areas of the plan and make recommendations to update it. It's a 10-year visionary plan. It is not set in stone. It is a guiding document for planning for the city as a whole. But like I said, it is not law. And correct me, Jeff, if I'm wrong, the last comprehensive plan was in the 70s.
1974.
Yes, everyone realizes that this is not a perfect document. It is a starting document to bring the city of Harrisburg up to date. And this should be the launching point moving forward.
Yeah, and I think to build on Tiffany's response, you know, I think one of the goals of the plan, or one of the purposes of the comprehensive plan, is to be, you know, overarching and to be flexible. When you have any sort of document that tries to look into the future like a comprehensive plan does, I mean, nobody can predict that future. I mean, if we would have passed this in 2018 or 2019, nobody would have predicted COVID, you know, and what that would have done to the plan. So the goal of the plan is to be broad enough and flexible enough to kind of adjust to future conditions. You know, I would hope that any future politicians in the city are not basically against the environment, you know, are not against making sure we have clean air, that we have places to play, that our streets are safe. You know, that's something that everybody should be in favor of. So, you know, certainly the document is broad enough to, I think, provide different perspectives as the future kind of comes on of how to say, like, okay, well, you know, now we have autonomous vehicles, so we don't need about parking anymore. So what is the plan should be able to, you know, accommodate an idea for what to do with that parking. It's not to say this is what you do with that parking. It's just to say things will be different in the future. Let's make sure that we're, you know, incorporating these broad themes into how we change the city. And, you know, the other thing I would say is that ideally this document's supposed to be a vision for the city, by the city. And by that, I mean city residents. So, you know, what comes out of the plan is, you know, the vision and the hopes and dreams of our residents for the future. And I would expect that, you know, that they would kind of, in some cases, vote those hopes and dreams in, so that people that are coming into office would be people that supported, you know, this vision as expressed by the community.
Great, thank you. That's it for my questions. I will open it up now to my colleagues, and I will start on the other end of the dais, and I'll start with Councilwoman Daniels.
I don't think I have any questions.
Okay, Councilman Majors.
Yeah, no, I think some of the comments I had were already addressed or spoken. Again, like, as we're going to look to implement, this isn't just a document that is solely on city council or city staff or the planning commission. You know, as you go through that implementation section, you realize that we're going to have a lot of stakeholders and partnerships in order to accomplish much of what we're looking to do in this comprehensive plan. So if that's, you know, I do think that one of the things that we can do, you know, really is to work with our codes department to strengthen some of the work that they do, so that we can, you know, push a little bit more on some of the property owners that may not be keeping up with what they're doing, but in order to get some, with some of these properties, we're going to need partnerships and financing. And I think as we're starting to come out of the financial situation that the city has been in for decades, and hopefully lending institutions will be able to partner with them and partner with city residents to make a lot of these things happen. We have to make sure that we're city focused on a lot of what we do. And to your point, Dave, it'll be our job to work with city staff to hold them accountable on, and as we establish timelines for some of these for some of the pieces in the plan to get them taken care of. So that's all I have. But thank you to the Planning Commission for all your work. Thank you, Jeff. And I know we'll be doing another round of hearings. This isn't because of the work you're doing, it's just to try to include, to get more engagement. This process has been going on for 6 years. I remember going to the first BHBG hearings, meetings out in the community, and all the different iterations that we've gone through. So thank you for all your hard work, and we're getting you to the finish line on all this.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councilwoman Green?
That would help. Thank you. I really don't have any questions. One comment is I would really be interested in getting the feedback of our department heads as we continue to move forward, because they will be an integral part in planning this and seeing it forward. And I think that's really where the administration's portion comes in. I know there was a debate on what the administration's portion was during the comprehensive planning process, but I feel like that this is where the administration really takes in, where those department heads can take charge in getting some of those plans and planning, some of these aspects, implementing some aspects of the comprehensive plan. Thank you to all my fellow fellow planning commission members. We've spent many long nights together on this. I'm glad to see it continuing to move forward. My introduction to the planning commission was the comprehensive plan. So that was a great introduction. It really helped me to learn more about the city overall, and the city's past, present, and what we look to see it as in the future. So that's the only comment I have. Thank you all.
Thank you for that. Thank you for all your additional work outside of being on council, because it's been many long hours with you at council. I can't imagine doing more on the planning commission. So kudos to you and all your hard work and commitment to the community. All right, Councilwoman Bowers.
Thank you. I just have one follow-up question for Mr. Knight. Do we have any updates on the commentary that we received thus far? I know last meeting you mentioned about 10 comments were received. I didn't know if any additional comments were received in the interim.
Looking at the inbox for the complaint comments now, I have not. Of course, we've received feedback from the public here in these webinars, and it sounds like some of the council members have also been receiving feedback themselves individually, and as Commissioner Monnier noted, there's been discussion groups out in the community too. So I would anticipate that we will be receiving more, and I think as the process gets a little bit more granular, which it sounds like Councilman Matson's aiming for, both physically out in the community and also maybe like chapter by chapter, that we might get some more comments that way as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Thank you to Councilman Matson for your leadership with these discussions. I look forward to community discussions where it is safe for everyone to participate. Thank you to all of the planning commissioners who've been present during these discussions, and thank you for all of your diligence up until this point. I hope that you are proud of the work product that you spent so much time on, as you've mentioned, and I hope that we can all work together to ensure that this document is working for the next 10 years for everyone in the city. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, for implementation, any final comments from the public? Raise your hands if you have any comments from the public. Okay, seeing none. Mr. Knight, we will hand it over to you for your final comments.
I don't really have many final comments other than to kind of echo a lot of the council members' statements. It's been a long process, and that means that their conditions have changed, and so we do expect modifications and revisions to the document, both to reflect kind of new conditions on the ground, but also comments from the public. So we certainly don't see this as being a final product just yet. But that all being said, I am really happy that we've gotten to this point. I'd like to thank the planning commissioners, because we have had many meetings that have gone pretty late into the night, specific to this document. And when we were in the midst of those, it could be hard seeing getting to this point. But now we're here, and they deserve a lot of credit. The council members deserve a lot of credit for getting to this point. And I do look forward to whatever process happens after this, and to eventually having this document be the first, phase of getting us reset, as Tiffany said, so that we're not going through a years-long process. The next time we update this, we kind of look at this and say, okay, this was okay, this needs to be changed, this, was good, but the whole format kind of generally works. Let's just update this document. I think that's kind of where we're looking to get into the future. I am excited to, see the Harrisburg that gets implemented by this document. And, I'm hoping I'm a part of that going into the future. And, I just look forward to working with the community to get this across the finish line.
Thank you for that, Mr. Knight. I don't think there's much to add to that. So with that, we will conclude this hearing. Again, I want to thank everyone's hard work, the planning commissioners, my colleagues, Mr. Knight, and all the city staff for all the work into this document. We're almost there. Like I said, these videos will be they are recorded, and they will be accessible to the public to review. And, if they have any additional questions, they can follow up, but we will look to do some more outreach in the physical world, not digital world. How that all looks, we'll have to base it off the CDC guidelines, but I do think we can find a way to do that safely and effectively. And so with that, I will conclude this hearing, and thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Take care.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.